The negotiations were not going well. Callum Voss sat at a long, curved table inside the Raskari warship, doing his best to keep his expression neutral. Across from him sat General Zyra Vector, her sharp golden eyes locked onto his with the intensity of a predator. She was tall, powerful, and every bit as dangerous as the reputation that followed her. A deep scar ran down her left cheek, a mark of honor in Raskari culture. Her crimson battle armor gleamed under the bright, artificial lights, the heavy metal plates making her look even more intimidating. Beside Callum, his fellow Earth diplomat, Ambassador Jonas Hale, cleared his throat nervously. The Raskari were not known for their patience, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "We, the people of Earth, wish for peace between our nations," Jonas said carefully, "but we cannot accept a treaty that forces us to." Zyra slammed her fist onto the table. The impact rattled the glasses of green Raskari wine that had been set out for their friendly meeting. "You talk too much," she said, her voice a deep, commanding growl. "Words mean nothing without action." Callum sighed. He had been studying the Raskari for months, and he knew this was their way. They valued strength over words, action over hesitation. If they saw weakness, they would exploit it. Standing, he met Zyra's gaze with a calm expression. "Then let's settle this the Raskari way," he said smoothly. The room fell silent. Even Jonas turned to him in horror. Zyra's expression shifted, surprise first, then intrigue. "You challenge me?" she asked, standing as well. She was nearly a head taller than Callum, her presence towering. "In a way," Callum replied, carefully choosing his words. "You say words mean nothing without action. Then let me prove our sincerity through action." Zyra narrowed her eyes. "Interesting," she murmured, stepping closer. Callum had no idea what he had just done. He was improvising, hoping to turn the negotiations in his favor. But when Zyra suddenly smirked, he knew something was wrong. The warriors in the room burst into cheers. Jonas grabbed Callum's sleeve and whispered urgently, "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "No," Callum admitted, heart pounding. "You just performed a Raskari courtship challenge." Callum froze. Zyra grinned. "You are bold little human," she said, stepping even closer. "You have challenged me, not to battle, but to claim." Callum's brain struggled to keep up. "Wait, claim?" Zyra tilted her head. "You do not even know your own actions." "Foolish, but amusing." She turned to the other warriors. "By our law, this man has offered himself to be my mate." The room exploded into cheers and laughter. Some warriors pounded their fists on the table, others clapped in amusement. Callum felt his stomach drop. Jonas looked like he wanted to die on the spot. Zyra leaned in, lowering her voice so only Callum could hear. "Are you afraid, human?" Callum swallowed hard. "More." Surprised. Zyra's smirk deepened. "Good. You will need that spirit if you wish to survive me." Callum Voss had survived interplanetary diplomacy, assassination attempts, and backstabbing politicians, but this was something else entirely. He sat stiffly inside the grand hall of the Raskari warship, surrounded by towering alien warriors who were still celebrating his so-called courtship challenge. The air was thick with the scent of spiced drinks and burning incense, and every now and then, a warrior would glance at him with either admiration, amusement, or outright disbelief. At the head of the room, General Zyra Vector reclined in her heavy iron throne, one leg draped casually over the other. She sipped from a goblet of dark red liquid, watching Callum like a predator enjoying its hunt. Callum cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice calm. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." Zyra raised a sharp black brow. "Oh, you think I challenged you, but on my planet, that wasn't." "You spoke boldly, and you stood in defiance," Zyra interrupted smoothly, twirling the goblet in her hand. "And you did so before witnesses." She gestured to the other warriors, who nodded in agreement, grinning like they had just witnessed the greatest entertainment of the century. By Raskari law, Zyra continued, her golden eyes gleaming. You have publicly declared your worth as a mate, and I, the strongest of my clan, have accepted. Jonas, Callum's fellow diplomat, leaned in and whispered urgently, you really need to find a way out of this. Fast. Callum exhaled slowly. All right, let's say, hypothetically, that I wasn't trying to propose. What happens if I refuse? The room went silent. A heavy pause stretched between them, and then Zyra laughed. A deep, rich sound that sent a shiver down Callum's spine. Refuse. She echoed, as if the word itself was a joke. Oh, little human, that is not how it works. The warriors around them chuckled, some shaking their heads. A massive Raskari with thick braids pounded the table and grinned. You should be honored, human. General Zirak could crush you like an insect, yet she has deemed you worthy. Callum resisted the urge to rub his temples. This was escalating way too fast. All right, he said, thinking quickly. But you have rules, don't you? You said Raskari law determines how this works, so there has to be a way to challenge it. Zara leaned forward, intrigued. You wish to challenge the bond. If that's what it takes, Callum said carefully. The warriors hissed in excitement. A challenge meant a contest, a test of worth. Zyra's smirk returned. Very well. If you wish to challenge the bond, you must prove you are unworthy. There are 3 ways to do this. She raised one finger. 1. You can be bested in combat. Not an option. Callum wasn't stupid. Fighting a 7-foot-tall, battle-hardened warrior in her own territory was a death wish. She raised a second finger. 2. You can bring shame upon yourself so great that I revoke my claim. That sounded slightly better, but knowing Raskari culture, it probably involved some horrifying public humiliation Callum wasn't ready for. Zira raised a third and final finger. Or 3. You outwit me. Prove yourself to be so clever, so cunning, that even I must admit defeat. The room fell into a tense hush. Raskari were warriors, yes, but strategy and intelligence were just as respected as strength. Zira leaned in closer, her voice low and teasing. But be warned, Callum Voss. No one has ever bested me in wits. Callum's lips slowly curled into a smirk. Now that was a challenge he could work with. Callum Voss had talked his way out of war, negotiated peace with hostile species, and survived diplomatic sabotage. But nothing had prepared him for arguing with his new alien wife. Zyra Vector stood across from him, arms crossed, her golden eyes filled with amusement. You have chosen the path of wits, human. A bold move. Around them, Raskari warriors watched like an audience waiting for the battle to begin. Some leaned against the heavy stone pillars of the war hall, while others whispered bets. Callum adjusted his collar, keeping his voice calm. I assume I get to pick the terms of the challenge. Zara smirked. Of course, but be warned. If you fail, you accept me as your mate without further protest. Callum sighed. No pressure. His mind raced. He needed a test that played to his strengths, not hers. Something where brute strength wouldn't help her. Something sneaky. Then an idea struck him. He met her gaze. A test of strategy and deception. If I can trick you, truly deceive you in a way that you don't see coming, then I win. The warriors around them murmured, intrigued. Zyra tilted her head. Trick me. Callum nodded. If I succeed, the bond is broken. If I fail, I accept the marriage. For the first time, Zyra looked genuinely interested. Very well. You have 3 days. Trick me before then, and you are free. Fail, and you belong to me. Callum swallowed. 3 days. He could work with that. Day 1. The first attempt. Callum's first plan was simple misdirection. During dinner, he spoke about Earth customs, explaining how humans played tricks on each other for entertainment. He told stories of illusionists and magicians, hoping to plant the idea that deception was always flashy. Then, as Zyra listened, he made a quiet bet with one of her warriors, a simple game where he placed a coin under one of 3 cups and shuffled them. If the warrior guessed wrong, Callum won. Zyra watched, unimpressed. Child's play. Callum smirked. Then try it. She crossed her arms. I have no interest in games. Ah, Callum said, leaning back. So you're saying you don't believe you'd win? Zyra's golden eyes narrowed. The room fell silent. Callum had already learned that challenging Araskari's pride was the fastest way to make them do something. Zyra sighed, stepping forward. Fine. He shuffled the cups, slow and deliberate. Zyra's eyes locked onto his hands, watching his every movement. When he finished, she smirked and tapped the left cup. Callum lifted it. The coin was there. The warriors laughed, cheering for their leader. Zyra leaned forward, her voice teasing. You will have to do better than that, husband. Callum forced a smile, but inside, he was recalculating. She had seen through the game immediately. This was going to be harder than he thought. Day 2, the unexpected setback. Callum spent the next morning observing Zyra. She was more than just a warrior. She was clever. She didn't just rely on strength. She read people, anticipated moves before they happened. That afternoon, he tried again, this time using a fake diplomatic message, claiming Earth's laws forbade interspecies marriage. If she believed it, she might release him. But Zyra just laughed. You think I do not research my enemies, Callum Voss, she said. I know Earth has no such law. Callum cursed under his breath. Of course she checked. Zyra stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You intrigue me, human, but you cannot deceive me. Callum swallowed. 1 day left. He had to pull off something big. Callum Voss had 1 day left to trick Zyra Vector, or he would be bound to her by Raskari law. So far, every attempt had failed. Zyra was not just a warrior, she was a strategist. She saw through misdirection, anticipated his moves, and never let her guard down. But Callum had one final plan, one last gamble that played to his strengths. He was done trying to outfight or outsmart her. Instead, he would use something far more dangerous. He would use her own mind against her. The setup. The warship's grand hall was buzzing with energy. Raskari warriors gathered once again, eager to see Callum's final attempt. Some had placed bets, while others simply wanted the entertainment. Zyra sat comfortably in her iron throne, one leg draped over the other, golden eyes gleaming with amusement. This is your last chance, Callum, she said smoothly. Make it count. Callum stood before her, outwardly calm, but his mind was racing. This had to be perfect. He took a deep breath. I won't try any more cheap tricks, he said. This time, I challenge you to a Raskari battle of the mind. The warriors murmured in interest. A battle of the mind was a rare challenge, one where 2 opponents sat across from each other and engaged in a mental contest of logic, tactics, and deception. Zyra tilted her head. A bold choice. Callum smiled. That's what she thinks. The battle begins. 2 warriors brought out a strategy board, a large black grid covered in glowing pieces. It was a Raskari war game, designed to simulate real battles. Each player took turns setting traps, commanding troops, and outmaneuvering their opponent. Zyra leaned forward, placing her first piece with precision. You cannot beat me at this, Callum. He simply smiled and placed his piece in a seemingly random spot. The game began. Zyra moved aggressively, pushing forward with an iron grip, just as Callum expected. He let her win the first few exchanges. She smirked, assuming he was struggling. That was the first step. Then, just as she prepared to crush his defenses, Callum made a sudden, reckless move. It was a mistake, a bad one. The room gasped. The warriors whispered. Zyra's smirk grew. You have lost. But Callum didn't look nervous. He simply leaned back. Have I? Zyra frowned, studying the board again. And then she saw it. Her golden eyes widened. She hadn't noticed before, but Callum's mistake had led her into a perfect trap. Every move she had made, every victory she thought she had been part of his plan all along. The warriors exploded into cheers and shock. Zyra stared at the board for a long moment, then leaned back with a slow, dangerous smile. "Well played, Callum Voss." The hall fell silent. "Does this mean?" Jonas started. Zyra raised a hand, silencing him. She stood, walking toward Callum, her tall, armored form imposing. Then, to everyone's shock, she laughed. "I have been bested," she admitted. "You win." Callum exhaled in relief. It worked. He was free. But before he could celebrate, Zyra leaned in, her voice low. "I have never lost before. That makes you interesting." Callum blinked. "Oh, thanks." Zyra's smirk deepened. "Be careful, Callum Voss. You may have won the challenge, but now I want you even more." Callum Voss had won, technically. He had outwitted Zyra Vector, one of the most feared warriors in the Raskari Empire. By the laws of her people, she had to release him from the marriage bond. So why did it feel like he had walked straight into another trap? He sat in the warship's lounge, a dimly lit chamber where Raskari warriors gathered to drink, boast, and relive their victories. Across from him, Jonas was grinning like an idiot. "You did it," Jonas said, clinking his glass against Callum's. "You actually beat her." Callum exhaled. "Yeah, I did." Jonas narrowed his eyes. "You don't sound happy." Callum glanced across the room. Zyra was watching him. She sat with her usual confident ease, sipping a dark crimson drink, her golden eyes never leaving him. It wasn't the look of someone who had lost. It was the look of a hunter who had found more interesting prey. Jonas followed his gaze and chuckled. "Oh no, she's not letting you go, is she?" Callum ran a hand down his face. "I think I just made things worse." Jonas laughed. "You really shouldn't have won so well." Callum sighed. "You think if I trip and fall on my face, she'll lose interest?" Jonas smirked. "I think she'd just find it adorable." An unexpected invitation. Later that night, as Callum walked toward his quarters, a Raskari guard blocked his path. "The general requests your presence." Callum raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I thought I was free." The guard smirked. "She said you would say that. She also said, tell him a warrior does not surrender so easily." Callum sighed. Of course she didn't. Still, refusing wasn't an option. So he followed the guard through the ship's winding halls until they reached a private chamber. The doors slid open, revealing a space surprisingly elegant for a warrior. Soft lighting illuminated dark stone walls, and in the center, Zyra sat on a raised platform, looking far too pleased with herself. She gestured to a chair across from her. "Sit, Callum." He hesitated. Is this a diplomatic meeting? Or am I about to be thrown out of an airlock? Zyra chuckled. "If I wanted to kill you, I would have done so already." Callum sat cautiously. "That's comforting." Zyra leaned forward. "You are free of the marriage bond. But tell me, Callum Voss, why do you still intrigue me?" Callum met her gaze. "Because I beat you." Her smirk widened. "Because you challenge me." She tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she wanted to solve. "Most men seek to impress me with strength," she said. "You impressed me with intelligence. I have never met a man who would rather fight with his mind than his fists." Callum shrugged. "I pick battles I can win." Zyra's golden eyes gleamed. "Then tell me, strategist, how do you plan to handle this battle?" Callum hesitated. He had expected her to be angry, insulted, or even dismissive after his victory. Instead, she was more interested in him than before. He leaned back. "I suppose that depends. Are we still enemies?" Zyra chuckled. "No, Callum. Now we are something far more dangerous." Callum raised an eyebrow. And what's that? She smirked. We are equals. Callum Voss had expected many things after tricking Zyra Vector. He had expected anger. He had expected her to dismiss him. Maybe even an assassination attempt. What he hadn't expected was for her to become even more interested in him. Now, instead of trying to force the marriage, she had shifted tactics, and that was even more dangerous. A warrior's invitation. The next morning, Callum found himself summoned again. This time, the message was simple. Meet me in the training hall. Jonas, who had been enjoying the entire situation far too much, smirked. You gonna go? Callum sighed. Do I have a choice? Jonas clapped him on the back. Nope. Good luck, buddy. The test of strength. The training hall was a massive arena-like chamber, filled with Raskari warriors sparring in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The air smelled of heated metal and sweat. Callum barely had time to process the sight before Zyra stepped forward. She was dressed in sleek combat armor, her golden eyes locked onto him with deadly amusement. Callum, she greeted. You have tested my mind. Now, I wish to test your body. Callum blinked. That sentence sounds way more dangerous than it should. Zyra smirked and tossed him a blunt training weapon. A simple duel. First to yield loses. Callum caught the weapon with a sigh. And if I refuse? Zyra raised an eyebrow. Are you afraid? Callum exhaled. She knew exactly how to push his buttons. Fine, he muttered, rolling his shoulders. But if I die, I'm haunting you. Brains versus brawn. The duel started fast. Too fast. Zyra moved with inhuman speed, striking at him before he could fully react. Callum barely dodged, feeling the rush of air as the training blade missed his ribs by an inch. He had exactly zero chance of beating her in raw strength. So, he did what he did best. He played dirty. Instead of meeting her power head-on, he sidestepped at the last second, letting her momentum carry her forward. Zyra spun with surprising grace, her smirk growing. Clever. Callum kept moving, forcing her to chase him instead of letting her dictate the fight. He ducked, dodged, and used the environment, knocking over training dummies and slipping between obstacles. The watching warriors laughed and cheered, enjoying the show. Then, finally, he saw his chance. As Zyra lunged, he dropped low, sweeping her legs out from under her. For the first time, Zyra fell. The warriors went silent. Callum panted, pressing his weapon to her chest. Yield. Zyra lay there for a moment, her golden eyes locked onto his. Then, to his absolute shock, she laughed. A real, delighted laugh. You truly are different, she said, sitting up. Very well, Callum Voss. I yield. The warriors exploded into cheers. Callum blinked. What just happened? An unspoken agreement. As the crowd dispersed, Zyra approached him, still smirking. You fought well, she admitted. I fought smart, Callum corrected. Zyra's smirk deepened. That is why I like you. Callum exhaled. You're really not letting this go, are you? She stepped closer, voice low. No, Callum. This is far from over. And somehow, he wasn't sure he wanted it to be. Callum Voss had been playing this game carefully. He had avoided getting pulled into Raskari traditions, dodged their marriage laws, and outwitted Zyra in a mental duel. He had even survived to fight against her without ending up in the medical bay. But now, he was beginning to realize something terrifying. Zyra wasn't chasing him anymore. She was letting him chase her. And that was far more dangerous. A sudden mission. A few days after the duel, Callum was summoned, not by Zyra, but by the Raskari High Command. Jonas whistled as Callum read the message. Official business now. Someone's moving up in the world. Callum sighed. Or getting dragged deeper into trouble. Jonas smirked. Same thing. The dangerous offer. The meeting was held in a grand chamber, lined with dark stone and banners bearing Raskari battle sigils. Seated at the head of the table was Admiral Korda, a grizzled Raskari leader with a face like carved iron. Zyra stood at his side, watching Callum with unreadable golden eyes. "Callum Voss," Korda rumbled. "You have proven yourself, uniquely capable." Callum sat cautiously. "I'll take that as a compliment." Korda grunted. "We have a situation. A diplomatic meeting between the Raskari and the Rellan Dominion is about to take place. We require someone skilled in human deception." Callum raised an eyebrow. "You want me to lie for you?" Zyra smirked. "We want you to negotiate for us." Callum blinked. "You have hundreds of trained diplomats." Korda nodded. "Yes, and the Relans hate all of them." Callum exhaled. "Great. The Relans are a stubborn species," Zyra added. "They admire cunning over brute strength. That is why we need you." Callum frowned. "And what happens if I fail?" Korda's expression darkened. "Then we go to war." No pressure. The impossible task. Callum sat in his quarters that night, staring at the mission details. Jonas leaned over his shoulder. "So let me get this straight. You tricked an alien general out of marrying you, and now she's using you for intergalactic politics." Callum groaned. "Yeah." Jonas laughed. "She's good." Callum rubbed his temples. "Too good." But as much as he hated to admit it, this mission made sense. The Relans weren't warriors. They were manipulators, always looking for an angle, a weakness. Zyra knew Callum could see through that. She had played him into this role perfectly. And worse, he didn't even mind. One last warning. The night before the mission, Zyra found him alone in the observation deck. She stepped beside him, arms crossed. "Are you ready?" Callum smirked. "I don't think I've ever been ready for anything involving you." Zyra chuckled. "Smart answer." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, staring at the stars. Then Zyra spoke softly. "Be careful, Callum." Callum glanced at her. It wasn't a threat. It was concern. He smiled. "Worried about me?" Zyra's golden eyes flickered. "Only because you are useful." Callum chuckled. "Sure." But deep down, he knew the truth. And so did she. Callum Voss had talked his way out of many impossible situations before. But this was a diplomatic nightmare. The Rellan Dominion delegation sat across from him, their sleek, silver-scaled faces unreadable. The Raskari warriors flanked his side, their posture stiff with distrust. And sitting at the head of the table, watching him with those golden, knowing eyes, was Zyra Vector. She had dragged him into this, and now she was letting him handle it. No pressure. A dangerous negotiation. The Rellan envoy, a tall, sharp-eyed alien named Veros, leaned forward. "The Relans do not trust the Raskari," Veros said smoothly. "Your people are aggressive." Callum smiled. "That's one way to put it." Zyra shot him a look. Callum continued, unfazed. "But aggression isn't always bad. The Raskari don't waste time with lies. They say what they mean. And right now, what they mean is simple. They don't want war." Veros narrowed his reptilian eyes. "So they say." Callum leaned back. "You know what I see? Two sides who don't actually want to fight, but are too stubborn to admit it." Veros flicked his tongue, considering. "And what do you propose, human?" Callum glanced at Zyra. "The Raskari will agree to a neutral trade zone. No military presence, no interference." Korda, the Raskari admiral, stiffened. "That is." Zyra raised a hand, silencing him. Callum kept going. "And in return, the Relans will allow controlled access to their star routes. You both make a profit. You both save face. No one has to lose." The Rellan delegation murmured among themselves. Veros watched Callum, thoughtful. "You speak like a Rellan human." Callum smirked. "I take that as a compliment." A long silence. Then, finally, Veros nodded. "Agreed. Victory. and a new problem. The moment the meeting ended, Callum let out a slow breath. Zura approached him, arms crossed. "You surprised me." Callum smirked. "Admitted. You knew I'd pull it off." She tilted her head. "Perhaps." Callum grinned. "You owe me one." Zura stepped closer. Too close. "The Raskari do not like debt," she murmured. "We repay what is owed." Callum swallowed. Why did that sound more dangerous than anything else? Before he could respond, Zira smirked and walked away, leaving Callum standing there, heart pounding, knowing this game wasn't over. It had just begun.